I'm Sasha DeWitt, and this is the Studio Notes Podcast, the show where I chat with artists about the real-life stuff of being an artist. Hi, and welcome to Studio Notes with me, Sasha DeWitt, and today's guest, Joe Blaker. Joe is an artist and illustrator based on the edge of the West Yorkshire moors. So Joe, in season 1 of the podcast, one of the things that I've been asking everyone to talk about is their journey to a creative career. So how about you? How did you get started?
Well, it was always something I was going to do, really. I really enjoyed drawing as a kid and loved making. A lot of my favourite sort of childhood memories are creativity related. So real intense moments of joy, like discovering things. And I remember tracing Dick Bruner characters and just that being like, whoa, this massive revelation. So, and my mum was a children's librarian, so there were a lot of books around, a lot of children's books. We used the library a lot. And I remember real quite intense delight in like looking at some illustrations as a child as well, and like really specific bits of illustrations. Anyway, and then so I'd like an art teacher at high school told me about art college. I'd never heard of it, and she wasn't even my teacher, so I'm really grateful, to this woman whose husband was an artist. And so that put me on to the possibility of art college. So I went straight to art college after my high school. And it was an amazing experience, and I'm really glad that I did that. But the course there were lots of good things about it, but it wasn't really what I needed, I suppose. It was run by an advertiser. There was meant to be an illustration tutor, but he was never there. I spent a lot of time in the darkroom and did a lot of darkroom photography. That really introduced me to lots of like history of art and design, and used the library a lot there. Discovered a lot of sort of female artists, and it was like really valuable education. And anyway, I went on to a BA, and again, that was actually a strand of that degree was advertising, but it wasn't the strand I was in. So it was more of a graphic design and illustration degree, and you only really specialised as an illustrator in the 3rd year. I was making a lot of handmade work, and they basically kind of had to twist my arm and make me use computer because they were a bit like, you're not going to get your degree if you don't do this. And I did a little bit of printmaking at uni. I think the course I did, I've always been really drawn to sort of cross-disciplinary courses, because I've always enjoyed like print media and graphics, but I'm not a graphic designer. But for a while my work was a little bit in between, and I was doing a lot of sort of hand-drawn typography and stuff like that. But I was mostly sort of doing children's kind of non-fiction illustration, but stuff about nature or stuff about creativity, which is totally, has continued to be the big theme in all my work. And at that point I did a resource. I kind of created this resource, and I offered it to the Woodland Trust, a charity in the UK, and I did some workshops through that, and I was starting to do a little bit of workshop work I'd always been interested in working with children, and I'd always enjoyed that. And I'd spent a lot of time poring over instructional books as a kid, So my mum had quite a lot of sewing books, but I loved watching that whole Blue Peter instructional making stuff. So all those interests started coming together, I suppose. And after my degree, I wasn't ready at all to get any commercial work as an illustrator, and I've never really resolved whether I really work that well as an illustrator or not. It's definitely someone that was a bit in between the cracks and probably more at the sort of fine art end of being an illustrator, or the illustration end of being a fine artist. So for a little while, I kind of rebelled against myself and was like, I can do other things. I'm going to prove this, I can do other things. There's more to me than just drawing, because I just really didn't know what I was going to do. So I spent a little while floating around, and then started getting voluntary work. I did an internship with a film festival. I worked for a local arts festival. This was all in London, and I did a placement with an arts organisation called Into Art, who work with adults with learning disabilities, and they were working with, at the time, on projects with kind of contemporary art galleries, and were doing really interesting, they still do incredible work, and that was a really great experience. And partly it was that experience that led me to think, I was so inspired by the work that the artists they were working with made. It really reignited my love of drawing. And my tutors on my degree had spoken about MAs at the Royal College of Art, and I made, oh no, yes, I did, so the voluntary work led to doing a desk job for 2 years maybe, for another conservation organisation called the RSPB. And I loved that, but it was so not right for me, and I was quite unhappy by the end of it. And so during the last sort of period of time there, I realised I needed to return to my own creative practice, and I decided I'd try to apply for the MA at the RCA, but I felt that I needed to create an entirely new portfolio, as you do. Maybe I didn't, but anyway. So I got a part-time job, and I went and prepared a portfolio, and then got on and did the 2-year MA, which was again a cross-disciplinary course basically. So there were filmmakers, graphic designers, illustrators, and some artists. But I went in as sort of not very much of an illustrator, and I came out of even less of an illustrator. And I think a lot of the illustration students had a kind of difficult ride on that course at that time. So it wasn't just me, I think. And yeah, I began picking up, I was offered some work through an outreach part of the RCA. I just began picking up more of the workshop work, so working with other people. I did a little bit of teaching at the local university, got into doing gallery education stuff, and my own work was sort of bubbling away alongside that. Kind of set up a little bit of a collective. We did a couple of exhibitions, but a lot of people went and had babies and got too busy. And then, yeah, got to a point where a few years ago, the way the work I was doing, the way I was doing it, was just leaving me really exhausted, and I felt that I needed to go back to my own practice again. So, and just invest more time in it. And I felt like I needed to prove to myself that I could do something with it, because I've been very good at experimenting and playing, but I've never found it that easy to execute things, see things right through to the end. So I spent some time developing a range, basically setting up a little business, doing my own range of greeting cards and illustrated designs and things like that. And was trying to keep that going and doing my own and doing the workshop work. And then COVID came along and threw a spanner in the works, like it did for everybody probably, or a lot of people. Yeah, and just during that time, I think I was questioning the illustrated product stuff I was doing. Just kind of decided to kind of really clear as much of the, extra stuff away as possible. I just wanted to concentrate on drawing. So that's kind of what I've been doing for the last couple of years, and focusing my teaching work as much as I can around drawing as well alongside that. Yeah, so that's the whole 39 years.
I love it. I mean, it's such a fascinating journey. And I think that some of what I'm real like resonates with me, probably it's very similar to a lot of my own thought process, but the whole thing about sort of illustration, but not being someone who is at all maybe capable of being an illustrator. Like, because I myself, when I started, I went towards illustration because I could understand what illustration was a lot easier than I could understand what sort of fine arts or contemporary art was, or painting or any of that. But when I was within that universe, the illustration universe, it was like, whoa, I'm not cut out to be an illustrator. I don't do well with briefs. I feel like that's like another boss telling me what I need to do and how I need to do it. And yeah, so I find that quite fascinating, your own journey through that sort of realization of, yeah, well, maybe illustration isn't what I am. But then there's something as well within illustration. I think there is this desire to sort of push boundaries. Well, what is illustration? Because we often talk about it with a very sort of, I come from America and you're within England, and you see illustration within some very set parameters. But when you look at European illustration or like South American illustration, some of that stuff is really amazing and definitely not what we're thinking about, I think, in some ways.
Yeah, and I still haven't ruled it out. And I think partly my love of experimentation and nobody ever really getting me to focus on developing a style or a specialism, even with a set of materials or anything like that. That's a big part of it, and I can see that I feel like I've been getting closer to a more limited way of working. So not working across not pinging around, trying lots of different things all the time. And and just like you say, I think that it is about the way you perceive that type of work. And it's just as broad a label as art, probably, isn't it? And there are so many ways to work within it. And I can see that the work I was really most inspired by on my degree was often it was self-authored work. So it's always been that gap I've been most interested in and inspired by. But it's the puzzle of, making that your a means of supporting yourself. But and I feel lucky that I'm able to sort of keep my work bubbling away. I get frustrated at times, and I know I would benefit from longer periods where I could just concentrate on it entirely, but I feel lucky that I'm able to basically do this balancing act between freelancing and teaching and running workshops and things that all inform my drawing and how I'm working as well, alongside my drawing, so that over time I can see that I'm just chipping away at this sort of finding where I want to go with my work, because my work comes out of quite spontaneous or quite sort of feeling driven kind of starting points. So yeah, it's never been that easy for me I've never had a clear idea of where I want to go. And it's just taking, I think maybe it's just taking time, and just taking a long time to even get to the point of just recognizing for myself that drawing is my priority and concentrating on drawing is what matters, and just being able to try to sort of shut out the other things that pop up and easily distract me from that.
Yeah, so I think that's something that I have seen. I've been following you for a couple of years. I don't know how long, but certainly during lockdown, I can remember having come across your work or your Instagram, maybe longer than that, but having just watched what you've been, I mean, of course, it's only what you're showing to the public, right? You've got a lot of stuff going on behind, but seeing your your real love for experimentation and the drawing side has been coming sort of through, like becoming clearer and clearer to me as an outsider, even watching how your drawing practice, how the drawing side of your practice has grown, and maybe you've grown in confidence as well. And that's been sort of interesting to watch as an outsider, to see your joy in that. So a little bit, can you tell me a little bit more about that as well? Just
Yeah, so I think, I've just been reflecting actually on the last year. So this is the start of 23. So just today I've been looking back at the last year, and I can see that I've noticed that before, for a little while, I was working quite a lot with ink, and I was working outdoors, and I was working with some water soluble media outdoors as well, like location drawing, but I was tending to work more with tone than with colour. And I think it's just taken me time, because I think I'm quite easily overwhelmed by the complexity of things, and learning the sort of editing, or there's so much of drawing that's all about the looking and perceiving, and I think they're the skills that you develop alongside everything that's happening on the page. Looking back at last year, I can see that sort of in September, I just started working with colour. It's just so funny the way that even when you work the way that I do, which is quite intuitively, one thing does lead to another. So it's not a surprise to me that I began sort of drawing when I got more into drawing. Sorry, doesn't make any sense at all. I think starting life drawing classes again was a massive catalyst, and has been a sort of consistent thing that I've been doing all through the last few years. And I just really recommend it, because I think it teaches you so much about drawing generally. I think a lot of what you learn in life drawing, you can apply to other types of drawing. And then that got me going, and I do enjoy drawing from observation. So when I'm talking about drawing at the moment, what I'm mostly talking about is just drawing from observation. And like I say, I was beginning to work with ink, trying to draw from observation, outdoors and in the landscape. And I had realised through life drawing that when I consciously try to work with colour, I kind of freak out, and I don't feel confident with it, because in the past I'd just always gone with what was to hand. I just didn't think about it. But over time, especially maybe from having designed some products and things, I was becoming more aware that actually understanding colour so you can choose how to work with it was a big missing element of my knowledge. It's like I've always had this sort of, I don't know, all the technical side of things has never interested me. So I've basically spent the last 10 years slowly realising just through practice and self-teaching myself, I've just been filling in some of those gaps. So I never knew anything about perspective, still don't really. Yes, it was interesting. Looking back at last year, I can see that halfway through the year, I just made this change, and I've been working mostly with colour, but working quite small. So kind of a lot of it came out of the 100-day project that I did last year. So I was doing trying to fill a mini sketchbook every day for 100 days. And through that, noticed that the work I liked the best and the majority of the work was landscape based. So I thought, okay, I should focus on that. And then realised that this sort of practice of this tiny sketchbook, scrappy, pre-marked pages really worked for me as well. So I've tried to continue with an element of that, and just sort of working with a particular pen and in a kind of way, and then finding it hard to go back to like conventional sketchbooks, but realising that was easier when I broke up the page and kind of was creating mini sketches, multiple mini sketches on a page, and started working with pencil, which was a bit of a revelation because I just haven't really used it since being a teenager, and I think that fed into me using these coloured water soluble pencils, which is what I'm drawing with at the moment, and how I'm kind of exploring colour really unintentionally, but it's just what's sort of happening. And it holds, there is every now and then when the season changes, I get thrown off because, yeah, there'll be a point where everything looks so amazing, or the change, I've got kind of used to what's happening in the season, and then it changes, and part of my brain thinks, oh, I don't know how to do that. I don't know what to do with that. And of course, you only find that out by doing it, but it always takes me, it always stops me, and there's always this little uncomfortable, I'm not drawing, what's going on? Well, I don't really feel really rubbish about it. And then generally, once I get drawing again, I'm like, oh.
And I suppose as well, there's going to be, now that you're working with color a lot more, and I know that seasonality also plays into your work. So there's probably going to be this very interesting, what color palettes are you using, and are they going to change with the seasons? Because that's sort of what's really nice to observe, especially in the landscape you're in. That area around the Yorkshire Moors is very seasonal colors. That come to my own mind when I think about it. So it'll be really interesting to see how that progresses, and what happens with you being out in the landscape, and what colors you're recording.
Yeah, and I think that it's kind of, so I've been sort of working relatively consistently, for me anyway, since sort of September, so several months. And I've been compiling sketches from throughout each month into one image for the month. And so I've got sort of 3 or 4 that I've been able to look at. And yeah, I really enjoy exactly what you're saying, looking at that gradual shift, which is, how autumn doesn't just start, and, summer doesn't just finish, and all that. So yeah, I'm enjoying that. And I do like that element of drawing, that even it's sort of working for me, because I can struggle to fit drawing in or make time for it. I think I still need to make a lot more time for it. I feel like I don't prioritize it enough, but this approach means that I am gradually developing something, like just little bits at a time. And I really like the fact that it's a record of the passing of time, and really specific little observations often. Or I've noticed that a lot of the time I really zoom in on a really small section of a landscape. It's often something that catches my eye, and it's not necessarily this big grand view, or that sort of makes sense to me with the way that just the things I've always quite liked and have understood about my kind of visual sense and sensibility and things. I've always really liked shape and silhouette, and quite minimal modernist sort of design, and design even within, things like painting and fine art. So yeah, it's interesting sort of seeing those things developing, or you kind of observing things, yourself in your work. And looking back over the last year, I think across the different sorts of work that I've done, the work I like the most is the loosest. So I'm kind of interested in how that relates to the work I'm doing at the moment, because sometimes they're quite loose, but they're not always. And I've literally just sort of started a big bit that's been missing for quite a long time, that I've known is really sort of fundamentally not right, is that I very rarely now sit down with a sketchbook of materials and just mess about. And that used to be how I worked all the time.
Yeah,
so it's a bit like I've gone all or nothing.
That's definitely how I think of you. I think of you as very playful and experimental. Yeah, making, loose, inky. So I guess when I first started seeing what you were doing like a lot of loose, inky drawings, and really playing around with that. And then moving into, now you're using the colored pencils, I think you said. or the water soluble colored pencils. Yeah, so it's very interesting to see how these two things will start to connect.
Yeah. Yeah, because I have done some studio-based drawing this year it's the bigger, messier, more mixed media, and I've enjoyed that. Yeah, sitting down, I've just known that I'm kind of holding myself back by, I don't know if it's being too literal or not. I know I struggle with that idea of consciously sort of interpreting what you're drawing. So kind of making decisions like, I'm going to make that a little bit yellower because I know it's going to enhance this aspect of the drawing, or I'm going to leave that bit out of the composition altogether, or I'm going to do this or that. I don't really work like that. And I think that, or I haven't been, and I think that bringing in more of the way that I always used to work, which was just sit down, don't know what's going to happen, just move some materials about. I think that I'm hoping is going to be some sort of bridge to something, and that it might help me be a bit looser, maybe working more from memory or from more of a combination of sort of memory and photograph and sketches. Because I'm aware that for a lot of people, sketchbooks are like a stage in a process. But for me, for quite a long time, they've been the outcome. And it might stay like that forever. And I'm happy for sketchbooks to be my medium. But I do love working on a big scale. And yeah, so I'm kind of, feel like all those elements kind of are a part of what I need to work happily, because I think it brings in an element of freedom that I need, I think, to keep me engaged with the observational and outdoor drawing as a part of the motivation. And actually, I can see that that a lot of the time I can just be motivated by how using materials feels or what that is like. So I think that could be a big part of the sort of motivation that I'd benefit from, that I maybe haven't really been allowing. Or
It's so funny, I don't know that we set rules for ourselves, but sort of we set blocks for ourselves, right? And because you keep saying, I haven't really allowed myself to do this. And then it's like, well, you're the one setting the rules, or I'm the one setting the rules. And so why does that happen to ourselves, that we sort of forget that this was what I enjoyed, was all this loose mark making, or but then it's also interesting because so you were doing like the loose inky work, and then you moved into something that's less loose, but then now you're realizing, actually, I now need to bring something that I had before into what I'm doing now. And I love to see that progress. And I think I talk a lot about, we go in these cycles where you try something, then you do it and you do it and you do it, and then you move away from it, and then you come back to it, but you're sort of at a different level, or you have a different experience when you come back to it. And you start thinking about, well, how can I incorporate this in new ways? Because I've just gone back to doing like printmaking and monoprinting, which I haven't done for years.
right.
But now that I'm coming back to it, it's like, wow, my mind's exploding with the possibilities of things that previously I probably didn't have the skill or the technique to realize, and now I do. And so for me, it's like, wow, this has been a long journey to get back to something that I was doing 10 years ago, but didn't realize, couldn't realize at the time.
Yeah. Just the other day, I realised that in the past, years ago, when I used to sit down and just play with materials, it had always, often it would turn into some sort of landscape. And at the time, I thought that was just a lack of imagination. Or like, I don't know, I just saw that as a weak,
I was going to say, I think that's it. We're so critical of ourselves, isn't it? So you were doing, you were like, well, anybody can do landscapes, or everybody does landscapes. And then suddenly it's like, well, I don't have the imagination to do this or to do that. And then that's so not true. And it's just us being critical of ourselves that we set up those barriers, don't we?
Yeah. And I can see now, just as you were saying that it might be that I'm coming back around to that way of working, where it's, like I was saying, it's sort of, it might be more improvisational. It could be landscape based, but it might be more improvised. But that I feel like I've been accumulating a lot of just, I suppose it's a lot of reference really, but it's, and I mean, there's just so much, I still just feel like, I don't feel like I'd ever get to the end of that, is what I mean. But yeah, maybe it will be a case of returning to that process, just like you say, but with a lot more experience in the meantime, because it is something that I've always looked at and enjoyed experiencing. But so it's quite, it feels really good to be able to put it into images now. And I know I couldn't have done that when I was younger.
I love as well, like something that you've said, you've been saying so I guess going back a little bit, but you were saying how you're not always sure where you're going. But for me, as an outsider, I always think that you're someone who's really good at coming up with projects for yourself.
I feel like I feel like I don't have a have any. I mean, I know at the moment I am actually. But at the moment I'm kind of working on one, and the 100 days was such a big deal, I suppose, because I just really struggled to do things consistently.
You did the 100-day projects, and you then had something to show. Like you had the 100 sketchbooks, and I mean they were an amazing collection to look at. And I think you did a exhibition with them as well. It's kind of interesting that maybe that was that beginning of actually I can do this. I set a project for myself and I finished it, and I did something with it, and it was something bigger than just a sketch, than not just sketchbooks, but sketchbooks. Yeah,
but that's true. I had tried, actually. I'd started at the start of at the start of 2020. I wanted to draw a tree every day for that year, which now I'm like, that's a 365-day project. What was I thinking? But I found I couldn't, it worked all of it works for me when it's when there's the room for it to be spontaneous. And once we're stuck at home and I had to go out to find the trees, I couldn't maintain it. But so I suppose maybe I am a little bit better at setting projects myself than I realised, but I feel like it's not a strength. But I am I've been thinking about the 100-day project, doing that again, because it was really worth it. I think really worth me doing. It just helped me understand kind of what I need and what works for me. And it worked for me because there was so much room in it to be playful and spontaneous, and I could accomplish it in 5 minutes if I needed, if I wanted to.
yeah.
I don't know if I ever did it that quickly, or I could spend a day on it, and it was just really flexible, and I kind of need that flexibility, I think. But I've always been quite interested in the sort of relationship between kind of ideas, that kind of form of creativity, and then the just kind of doing stuff. So the intuitive, I suppose, because for me, it felt like when I was trying to be an illustrator, whenever I worked to a brief as a student, it was just not my best work. When I was creating products for my own, sort of trying to explore that way of working, that was around working with ideas. I found it hard having a creative brain that loves ideas and coming up with ideas, when actually what I'd really like to spend most of my time doing is just drawing, which sort of doesn't. I know that'll be interlinked. I know there'll be elements of that creative thinking happening in drawing, obviously, and I do still love to be inventive, like with drawing. But I found for me that the best sort of outlet for that is my workshops and teaching. But I can see that maybe an element of that is in the projects that we choose to set ourselves, or I suppose ideas for ways of working with drawing, or applications for drawing, or things like that. So I'm still kind of working out how those things fit together, because like I said earlier on, I can just get distracted by these ideas that pop up. It's just not the way that I'm happiest working. So
Yeah, I think it's quite tricky. I used to say, if somebody could just pay me to have ideas,
Mm.
that would be the ultimate job,
Yeah, yeah.
because I just love to generate ideas around stuff. I love to think like that. But at the same time, I love making, I like to make my own stuff. So
Mm.
yeah, there is that sort of push pull, I think, between how
Yeah.
do I have all these ideas and what do I do with them? And then how do I realize things and where do I realize them? And I think for me as well, teaching has been a huge
Mm.
um, way to sort of share some of that with other people. And
Yeah. I think I think part of the problem for me, like sort of saying about being a bit too literal, maybe with drawing sometimes,
mm,
or too rigid, like a little bit of being rigid in some ways. I think in a lot of ways I did grow up with a bit of a fixed mindset at the same time
mm,
as having this really creative brain. Or sorry, I don't mean really creative brain, but I mean somebody who, you know, was always inventing stories and always illustrating
yeah.
this, just I think I always thought, so when I was younger, when I got the idea, I was just like, that's that's it. I don't know, but I've learned that like what pops up as an idea for that'll make a great t-shirt, actually that idea might make a great workshop, or an idea that pops up as
Mm,
like a title for a drawing might actually be, you know, a book. I don't know, just completely the ideas. Yeah, I think how you perceive them can affect maybe how we work with them as well. And I think
mm,
that maybe I've just always been a little bit too rigid around that as well, and just wasn't didn't really see them as just a springboard enough. Do you know what I mean? I
mm,
wasn't able to get far enough past that initial idea to be like it's just a catalyst and you don't know where it's going to
mm,
take you, because that's fundamentally what kind of motivates me with all of it, is learning and sort of discovering by doing. So
mm.
yeah, it makes sense that for me, when I thought I knew what the outcome would be of an idea, I wasn't interested because there was no journey. I was making the mistake of thinking there was no journey there, when obviously there would have been. But
But I think you seem you're very process based. So it's the doing that is the thing as opposed to the final outcome.
yeah, 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 I guess so. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, if anything, I could do with. I do have a bit of a habit of just doing and then sort of putting in a draw, forgetting about it, moving on.
But
Really,
maybe in some ways it's like doing and sharing, and then through that sharing, that might also help you sort of start to consolidate what it is that's interesting you and what you're interested in going forward with.
yeah, definitely. I think sharing really helps sort of with processing it.
Mm,
When it is quite an intuitive process, you do need to get some of that out. And I think making time for that and reflecting on what's going on is probably really important, and probably something I could do with, yeah, spending more time on doing as well. And I think that's what helps keep you probably kind of like grounded with, or like that thing I was talking about distraction and things, and about working out direction and things. It's there in your work, isn't it? And I think it's a case of sort of reflecting on that, and like you say, talking to other people about it.
mm.
I miss that element, I think, about being part of a more active sort of creative place.
Yeah, I suppose when we start working on our own, once you move away from, whether it's school or you might have a group or, some place where you're getting that sort of feedback and having that dialogue with other artists, it does become,
Mm.
gosh, if you have to rely on your own thoughts, it can be really confusing. And, we're so critical of ourselves. And then suddenly you're lost. And yeah, just having that other people to have external dialogue with is very helpful.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's one of the things that I really enjoy about the life drawing class that I go to, but the urban sketching group that I set up
Yeah.
right near where I live. Yeah, just that sort of conversation and way of sharing work. But you're working alongside people and you're sort of hearing them talk about their work and vice versa. That's just so helpful. yeah, it's really helped, I think, over the last couple of years, like with what you were talking about with sort of confidence and things. But yeah, I think I could do with some more ways of more regularly doing some of that. Yeah, that externalizing the thinking, or actually doing the doing the thinking. But yeah, I do find that sometimes easier through conversation. Yeah.
And how about, what do you think, being someone who doesn't really seem to set out a plan or a path or anything like that, but what do you think is going to be next for you in this coming year?
Well, the last year, I think trying to do more of kind of what the last year's been about. So really, the last year's really been about actually my freelance teaching work. So it beginning to do more of my own drawing workshops and teaching, and keeping my drawing going alongside that. And the way they're sort of working together is working really nicely as well. So studio drawing then actually sort of feeds into workshops and doing my studio with people. So I'd love to continue working on that, and I've just started doing a seasonal life class, which is sort of blending different types of different sorts of a life drawing class, but with kind of work I would normally do outside and nature observation and things like that. And there is a little, I'm doing a pop-up, I know, like sort of towards the end of the year with a couple of friends. And I just the last sort of last little bit of the year, I was working on a few kits. So kind of bringing together actually the way that I do like to design a nice thing. I know that it is a bit of a skill that I, like a lot of artists, really appreciate real sort of the physical qualities of things, and I like to make a nice thing for as a gift or whatever. So I'd love to be doing more little kits that are about supported with a video or some sort of instruction or a workshop. But drawing wise, yeah, like I say, I think I'm going to try and do another 100-day project, considering an element of that being that I have to sell everything, because I'm so not confident with that, or just it's something I just sort of I don't prioritize, or I think I'll get around to. I think it's always just trying to make more time for drawing. I would like to do something. I'm hoping to keep the sort of local outdoor drawing that I'm doing going, and bring some of those drawings together. Somehow, all of those things are just a bit of a discipline thing, and a time thing, and stuff like that. But there's quite a few things I've been wanting to play with for a number of years. Yeah, I would. Who knows whether this year will be the year? But I've been. It sounds a bit random, but I've been wanting to mess about with some paper mache for years, and painting on clay. I would like to kind of explore. Yes, making tiles is something that really. But yeah, looking at kind of a little bit going back to applying my drawing to some products, but I think that would be different to in some ways to what I was doing before, and then really based on my sketchbook work. So yeah, that probably sounds like someone who hasn't really worked any of that out, because that's.
I don't think you need to work. I don't think it's not important to work it all out. I mean,
it's only the 2nd of January, right?
It's only the 2nd of January. And like you said, like, or this is how I feel about it. Like, I'm going to be an artist up until the end, right? This doesn't stop for me. My brain doesn't stop being creative, never stops. So I'm doing this until the bitter end, basically. And I think it's the same, with you. You're going to be doing this. So it can be gradual, and you can have things like the paper mache or the clay, where for years you kind of wanted to do it, and you think, maybe this year I'll get around to doing it. And I love seeing, because we sometimes think, well, how is this 3D work? But it does feed in, everything feeds into each other, and you never know what's going to be the thing that really gives you a breakthrough moment. And you think, yes, I now understand something I didn't understand before. So it's lovely to hear about you wanting to play around with a variety of things. And maybe it happens this year, maybe it doesn't, but that's okay.
Yeah, definitely. And just like we were saying about ideas and about the other stuff with being like sometimes thinking in a slightly too rigid way. I think it's exactly the same time with same thing with perceiving. We can get this kind of hunch or this thing, we think it has to happen in quite an immediate kind of. But actually, I'm realizing a lot of these things do occur. Basically, if they're going to stick, they stick around, and they will occur at some point.
But I think it's interesting as well. Like, I don't know, maybe I'm obsessing about the clay and the paper mache, but it's something that I find myself doing as well. So it's sort of like I always have clay sitting around near me because I always think, I'm going to do some little clay things. And then I go and I work with the clay. And then I'm like, oh yeah, this is why I don't work with this is why I don't do this. So it's like I'm constantly reminding myself of why I don't, why I've actually already sort of X'd this off as something I want to do. And this is why. But I like that. I like that experience. I love just keeping going back to stuff and keep trying it no matter what. Because you never know.
Yeah, definitely. Like you were saying about printmaking, and it's totally true. And I think it's just always going to happen, isn't it? There are always going to be those things that you're drawn to try it in.
We're explorers. That's the artist's way, I think. We're explorers, and we're going to keep exploring. So one thing I want to ask before we go, where can people find out about your courses? Is that on your website or by joining your newsletter? What's the best way for them to find out that information?
The newsletter through my website is probably the best, and social media. I'm still really sort of building all that side of things, so it's still really early days, and my website needs a massive rehaul. My newsletter is the best place for workshops. I do share about that on social media, but it's sort of hidden a bit more probably amongst my drawing. And
I will include links below to your website and to your social media so that people will know where to find you.
Right.
And I just wanted to say thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. It was really fascinating to hear your journey and to hear about where you are now as well. So thank you.
Well, thanks for asking me. I know that hearing other artists talk about their experiences and the whole scope of them, is the most helpful thing, I think.
Thank you so much for listening to Studio Notes with me, Sasha DeWitt, and guest, Jo Blaker. I love the way she has experimenting and exploring at the heart of her practice. To find out more about her work and her courses, you can click the links below. If you like this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe, and also share, as it really helps others to find us. And of course, thank you so much for listening to Studio Notes with me, Sasha DeWitt. Big shout out to the Arts Council who have given funding for this podcast as part of my DYCP grant. So thank you.